always fabulous Nick and Jeff show. And Nick, as always, it is amazing to catch up with you across the other side of the world in Dubai and have our regular session of talking about news, views, and our industry gossip. And it's a pleasure catching up with you and having a conversation today. What is going to be the highlight of today is this is our 2024 overview and outlook. And so, 2023 is in the books in the past and lots of changes happened. And we want to not only talk about what's happening in the industry, but looking forward in the industry too. So Nick, good to see you from Dubai.
You too, Jeff. I kind of feel that we've put 2023 behind us. It was a long year, right? It wasn't an easy year. And I've got my crystal ball and I have some thoughts and some ideas.
Well,
about what's going to be upon us.
I'm excited to look into that crystal ball with you today. So, when we look at 2024 and, tail end of 2023, and then what's happened even in the early days of 2024, it's been a really interesting market, right? So what have you seen in the market in general in the EOR business, but also in general in the employment markets?
So I think in general that there's positive sentiment and confidence. 2023 was a pretty roller coaster type of year. A lot of uncertainty about where things are going. So actually December was quite a difficult month, 2023 December. Q4 2023 seemed to be sluggish. But it's the tail end of the year. So budgets being set, growth strategies being set, and then when we bounce into 2024, January, to be honest, has been exceptionally busy. And there's positivity from people I'm speaking to at the C-suite down. So there's a willingness to invest, to grow, to share ideas. And when you've got that positive sentiment, it creates that virtuous circle. So, and money's ready to be spent this year. So I would say just from a high level, things appear to be far more buoyant and people are hopeful of potential interest rate rises, certainly in the interest rate decreases, I should say, in the Western world, which should drive certain behaviors from businesses in investment strategies. That's positive. And there's still a strong pull towards hiring international talent. So in the world of work, things haven't particularly slowed. In fact, we're looking forward to a very good first quarter in general. What about yourself on your side?
Yeah, and I've had a lot of conversations with either staffing providers or in the contingent workforce world and EOR world, and it's totally similar. Last year was a roller coaster. In December, for a lot of people, was one of the worst Decembers they've ever saw, with slowdowns and basically, as we all know, that in the contract or contingent world, a lot of contracts end in December and a lot didn't get renewed. So there was a lot of negative sentiment towards the end of the year. And then early this year, bam, I've been talking to people. It may have been that maybe companies cut too deep. And then in looking at the go forward, they've said, okay, we need to do these projects and invest in this. And of course, with the news of the great job reports and interest rates potentially coming down, there's a lot of positive sentiment. And a lot of the folks that I've been talking to have said, January is almost the best we've had on record. So it's an interesting dynamic. I don't want to count our chickens too early in 2024, but things have bounced back exceptionally in the early days of 2024. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few months, if that hiring consistently goes up or at least levels off, and at least you've got a good base again, right? And
what do you think about the jobs report? What do you think about the jobs report? Because effectively, it was double the amount of net new jobs than anticipated by the market. So, that would actually lend itself towards you thinking that potentially there's too much froth in the market, maybe too much spending, maybe inflation isn't under control. Where do you think those jobs are? Do you think it's tech? Do you think it's service? Do you think it's what type of industries are we talking?
Yeah, I still see layoffs happening in technology. And I
Yeah.
think that's still going to be an area of concern, and probably some not concern, let's say, but just modest growth and or modest decline. I think a lot of the worst is over, but they're still kind of pulling in the reins a little bit on future projects and things like that, and R&D. Where a lot of those jobs have come is from the services industry. So if you think about, travel is back, COVID's over, travel's back. With you know, a lot of the government spending that came through COVID, roads are being built, you know, so construction. With all the global uncertainty too, what we found is, you know, in the energy sector and certain areas like that, there's a lot of growth because they're looking for safe sources of oil and energy. So we're seeing a lot of growth in services, construction, energy jobs, in general, right? What we have seen is, you know, tech, financial sector has been more cautious, let's say, as well. So, you know, will those bounce back too? We'll have to see as it comes through, but that those other sectors where you kind of almost physically have to show up for work or provide in the services industry and construction, etc., have done quite well.
Yeah. No, I think talking about tech is something we're quite close to. I would say you've got to split it between service companies with a tech layer,
Yeah,
SaaS companies, and the average SaaS company that got, you know, well funded in the boom times, that potentially now has too much capital. There's too much runway, so actually it's difficult to know whether they're going to succeed or fail because they have so much cash to spend. Their runway is too long. Or companies that have a real strong product market fit, they're going to keep growing. There's definitely a few of those. And then AI and generative AI, of course, there's pockets of activities. I mean, from a talent acquisition perspective, if you said to me, your neighbor is a AI engineer, I could get him a job in 30 seconds.
yeah.
So it's not like the world has stopped. It's not like there's not pockets of roles that are super in demand. So I'd say it depends how you split it, but I think you've summed it up. From a US perspective, domestic, externally, Europe, the same. The markets are, I'd say, stagnant from a growth perspective in the core European markets, Germany, France, UK. There's a lot of attention on the Middle East. There's a lot of attention in Asia. There's a lot of talent being sought from Asia and Latin America. We're seeing a big demand for contractors in those markets still, specifically Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, that everyone wants to be paid in US dollars or euro, but typically US dollar. What do you think about that? Because that's something that seems to have just taken off. Obviously, there's inflation, hyperinflation in some of those economies. So the US dollar actually seems to remain in demand and strong. Yeah, and it's interesting because if you look at independent contractors versus employees, so let's talk about independent contractors versus employees or employer of record workers. So US company, workers in another jurisdiction, the client's not there. One being paid in US dollar, therefore their purchasing power remains strong because they're not getting paid in local currency, which is being devalued by the day. You can see the real attraction of that. So there's a huge demand for payments in hard currencies. But when you're employing people through employer of record structures, EOR structures, they have to be paid in local currency. That's the compliant legal way to pay. And then what we see is some workers say, well, I'm paid in Argentinian peso and I am getting stung because my purchasing power is decreased significantly, and they want to true that up on a consistent basis. So their salary is increasing, which is tricky then for the end clients to keep reviewing that. So it's an interesting mix and dynamic, but the trend we're seeing, big demand for talent, like I said at the start of the show, also in Asia. And I think that APAC region can overtake Latin America, who stole the show in 2022-23 for the talent war. So a lot of customer support, marketing, tech, assistant roles in that region are shifting to APAC as well. So we see a lot of demand in Malaysia, Indonesia, Indonesia, which is a fascinating country, and also Thailand, Philippines. So I like the way company or countries are acting like companies in a competitive nature for talent, and it's interesting how that drives psychology and demand and the movement of workers.
Yeah, it is very interesting, the geopolitical world we live in today. And so there's always looking for low cost sources of talent. And you mentioned how things are ramped up in 22, 23 in Latin America. And that may be shifting to the APAC region. And some of this is also starting to go with the geopolitical scenarios where do I hire, and have the labor arbitrage, but in safer countries that are aligned with the political scenarios too. So it's been very interesting to see how, the global talent marketplace is shifting based on not only costs in different regions, but what wars are going on and who's fighting who these days too,
Uh,
right? Has been fascinating to watch and making it trickier for our industries and HR professionals, talent professionals to, have more consistent strategic programs. Because, when you start thinking about hiring in international markets, it's a program. It's not just overnight that you think about it, and you want to
sure.
make sure it's strategic and you've got proper partners. There's compliance issues and regulations you got to deal with. So it's not just, hey, let's hire somebody overnight and then tomorrow shift. They're more strategic in nature. So, unfortunately, the geopolitical situation has also caused havoc with that you do have to sometimes switch overnight. Like back in the day, a lot of US companies pulled out of Russia, right?
Yeah.
And so with that, then your talent strategy has to change overnight too.
Yeah, and not just the companies, but also the individuals. So I actually think on another show we should talk about the rise of the, let's call it digital nomads slash nomad capitalists, people that are seeing where their options are, where they can maybe get a residency or a second citizenship to be able to basically have freedom of movement should that be required. So I actually, a lot of people I know, including friends of mine and clients, are now moving from one jurisdiction to another, which then creates more complexity with payment mechanisms and employment situations and contractors and companies. So this is a whole big topic I don't want to get into, but
Yeah,
it's
it's
interesting how things are
fascinating,
moving.
and I know we're going to be talking about it given some of the rise of things jurisdictionally, but the independent contractors and digital nomads are help try to smooth, how do you smooth your taxation? And so the nomads are looking for jurisdictions and residencies that have a better tax jurisdiction. But for companies hiring globally, it's very complex with employment laws, severance, terminations, and payroll taxation as well. So
So
moving towards independent contractors, we're seeing that
yes.
trend as well. And guess what? In response, we've seen governments starting to saber rattle, saying, hey, listen, independent contractors, we want to, of course, they'll say, oh, it's companies trying to take advantage of the workers. But in actual fact, it's more and more individuals are choosing to be independent contractors and because of taxation. And then companies are saying, well, if we could use independent contractors, we're going to, because we just have to pay the invoice. We don't have to worry about all of these complexities around employment laws, accruals of, severance pay, all of that stuff that, turn $100 an hour bill rate into, or sorry, pay rate into $170 bill rate
Sure.
plus, because all this extra stuff, I just want to pay that $100 per hour. And so there's a real trend towards independent contracting across the globe as well. And we're hearing that, like the Biden administration has press releases all over that they're enforcing more and more, and they're changing the rules. And we're going to see that, and we've seen it in the UK too with IR35 enforcement. You're going to see it in other jurisdictions as well. So the complexities around making sure you're compliant when engaging independent contractors are rearing their head again, for sure.
And these things tend to come in the 2, 4, 8 multiple cycles with the change of governments. And we don't like to get too political, but there's two things. Firstly, it is an election year in the US, which means it's very difficult to predict based on a confidence perspective, because if people see one way, they're more bullish on things, and sometimes they see the other way, they're less so, which can affect investments and strategic growth. But I actually think, coming back to the IC, we've seen in the news some things about some of the bigger players in this space, like Deal, Remote, some wrist slapping with compliance, abusive of independent contractor regimes, which kind of ties into what we're talking about. I mean, sometimes, to be quite honest, it suits the worker just as much. Does it suit the company? Sure, because it makes the bill rate cheaper, and every government wants a pound of flesh. So did you catch up any of that? What's your view on the whole independent contractor compliance? Because I'll tell you one thing, a lot of these pre-IPO companies, rightly so, they utilize independent contractors because they need to move fast at the beginning. And I think that's the right strategy, to be honest. I think it's the correct strategy. You need to move fast. When you get to a certain size and scale and the microscope is on you, flipping those independent contractors to employees is
the right thing. You can't have a CEO of a company as an independent contractor, period. They have fiduciary responsibilities. They're sitting in the chair every day. They're taking direction and control from the board. If you looked at the tests across any jurisdiction globally, and specifically in the US, where Deal's executive team sits, they're not following the proper laws. And so at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that this has happened, but it's also good that it's come to light, because, instead of trying to change laws that have been put in place over hundreds of years, i.e. the social safety net for employees, etc., there's tests that are there that have been there for years and years and years. And so following them is what's important, and making a determination, no, that worker should be an employee versus that worker, that worker is very knowledgeable around running their small business. They know the pros and cons, that they don't have coverages under worker compensation or social safety net things. And they're doing a job that would be more of a independent contractor or a small business provider or a professional consultant, like a plumber, electrician. And when I say that, you can do that as a professional consultant, that you don't need direction and control of the company, and you're actually bringing in your expertise. So in those cases, those are true independent contractors, and you can engage them as such. Sure. But, I've found that there's a lot of new entrants. There's a lot of VC money pouring into it. And the tech bro mentality of disruption forgets that there is a structure in place, there's lots of reasons why that structure is in place. And they go, oh, that's friction, we'll just ignore that and maybe lobby against it. And you can see the spin that Deal has put on their situation right now. Instead of taking their lumps and fixing it, they're taking a page out of the PR book of Uber and trying to lobby against it. And it's just, it's ignorant, quite honestly, unfortunately. And maybe I'm going to get a cease and desist letter on that, but whatever. At this point, it's a scenario where if you're going to get into this business, the EOR and IC business, and you're going to properly classify these workers and do the right things, right? Don't misclassify workers, because the structures that are in place are the ones that, are there for a reason, and they need to be abided by. This trend to ICs is okay as long as you're doing it compliantly.
For sure. I think, aside the internal matters and how they're running their shop and compliance, the one thing I like about these organizations that have risen in the last 2 years is they have shone a light on the HR industry in general, platforms, remote work, the opportunities, employer of record. So if we look at it from a positive spin, actually, all the billboards, all the marketing dollars, all the Super Bowls, all the XYZ on the train stations and airports, to me is a good thing, because it's just put in the minds of HR decision makers and C-suite decision makers what options they have on the table. And I think it just boils down to why I'm passionate about the industry is 10 years ago, if I was hiring a marketeer or an executive assistant or a Facebook ads or AI engineer, I would have looked within a 10, 20, 30 commute of where I lived, because I wanted to be in the same room as them. It doesn't make sense. That is broken like many other systems. So actually, strip it back. It's going to be good. It's going to be a net positive for the industry as a whole, and we'll see who has first mover advantage. Going back to VC and PE dollars, we believe that this will be a very, very busy year from an M&A perspective. And from a VC perspective, there is a lot of dollars on the sidelines. They're going to be deployed in the most effective way possible. And I actually don't think many players in the HR space are truly tech driven. Okay, there's a few outliers, but I think that's going to dry up, and the money will feed to other sources.
So when you look at it, this call for more standardization and transparency in the market, so that buyers can understand what they're buying, is important, and not always go for the lowest price, because the lowest price may not always be the most compliant, and it actually may get you in trouble as the end employer. Because what we're seeing is a lot of these platforms, if you look into that button you just pressed on, I agree to terms and conditions, they're giving the liability to you as the employer, even though they're the platform that's saying they're helping you with compliance. And so, you know, you really got to be buyers beware. And so with that, it's also a call to, okay, how do we get more transparency and education into the market to say, in Italy, this is what the laws look like. And yes, you can go to the government website and figure it out, but as the large players come together, and even some of the new entrants come together, they can collaborate and say, okay, these are where we differentiate from each other. These are the standard stake, you know, table stakes, easy things like government remittances, and what as an industry is industry standard, to allow the buyers to understand it better. So as a North American or a US buyer who traditionally doesn't have 13th and 14th salary, that's paying vacation pay and all these things, it's sticker shock, right? When a US buyer is trying to hire somebody in Italy or in Germany or etc., and they thought they were going to pay this $100 an hour rate, and it turns out to be $175. If the market comes together and the players come together and say, this is what Italy looks like, these are the remittances, and we all abide by it, then the differentiators come on service and the service fee versus what the government is getting, or let's say what the worker's getting. And so we're seeing a call to come together, and a couple of the bigger players are trying to push more of this standardization in the market too.
Yeah, WEC, some other bodies getting together, you're aware of as well. So yeah, I think, you know, technology, when effective, is deflationary, and I'm happy to get my delivery cheaper and my food delivery cheaper and my other services cheaper. But do I think it's right to get employment models cheaper when you are pushing compliance and service delivery out the door? No. So I actually think a lot of the fresh faces will go to the wayside in the next year. And it will result in a handful of core players. And I think those core players will have a global footprint as opposed to a partnership model footprint that was existing 5 years ago, which was a necessity. So I think the race to quality, to service, to global infrastructure is the way forward, because if I'm a buyer and I want these services, I want to know that the company delivering the service is the company I'm speaking to. Right. I want to know who to call if it goes wrong. I want to know who to praise if it goes right. I want one throat to choke. I don't want indirect throats to choke. And I think it's just going to be an interesting 12 to 18 months. M&A, PE, tech, where will it all go? We don't know. We'll look in the crystal ball, but we've given a few ideas there. Who might acquire who might merge with who, so that's fun. What else do we have on our docket?
You know what? I think we're done. So we've talked about a lot here today, and I hopefully our audience has learned a few things and saw where, what's coming up for the new year. And it's been exciting talking to you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, good to be open-minded at these times, because actually what we may say may be relevant 1 second and irrelevant the next second. So you just need to have an open mind and be
Change
on
is
top of
constant.
things. Exactly. But great to see you. Let's have a cheers to a great 2024, and we'll be back next month with another round
Nick
of
and Jeff show.
Take care, everybody.